After eating a subpar dinner at the diner, Joshua and Roberto made their way back to the motel. Once in their room, they both sat down on the edge of their beds. So, what do you think about what those kids said? About a monster in the basement? Joshua asked as he picked at a hangnail. He looked up when Roberto didn't answer immediately. Roberto chuckled to himself and looked at Joshua with a sarcastic grin on his face. Do you really think there's a monster in the basement of that old farmhouse? Roberto asked through a growing grin. Joshua scoffed and shook his head. Well, I don't know if there's a monster in the basement or not, but there is something really strange going on around here. Joshua glanced at Roberto and got up and went into the bathroom. Come on, man. I was just giving you shit. Let's just get a good night's rest. And we can call Bethany in the morning and ask her what she thinks of what those kids said. Roberto offered, not feeling remorse for how he'd acted. Joshua came out of the bathroom and they both crawled into bed, and soon fell asleep. Joshua awoke to a bright ray of sun shining through the thin motel curtains. He yawned widely, stretched, and choked Joshua through his yawn. Joshua responded with a grunt and then rolled over. Roberto reached for his cell phone in the nightstand and realized it was only 6 in the morning. He contemplated going back to sleep, but had to tell Bethany about what the boys had said about the apparent monster in the basement. He was hoping it was just some urban legend that people told young kids to scare them and keep them out of trouble. He unlocked his phone and dialed Bethany's number. The line rang several times, and then a tired female voice croaked. Hello? Hey, Bethany, it's Roberto. I hope I'm not waking you, but something strange happened last night at the diner, Roberto explained. You guys okay? Bethany asked with concern lingering in her tired voice. Oh yeah, we're fine. When we were going into the diner, there was some kids outside. They said that there was a monster in the basement of the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Plainsfield. Roberto listened to several moments of silence before Bethany finally answered. Monster, huh? Well, like I mentioned when we spoke yesterday, that was Ed Gein's house. He was a monster. He robbed graves to keep body parts as some sort of sick trophy. He was said that he even practiced necrophilia and experimented with human taxidermy. Ed was obsessed with his mother, and as far as anyone knows, he never even went on a date. After he lost his mother, he went crazy. He started to prowl the local cemeteries and exhume recently buried women. He would hack off their body parts, keep them, and then return the parts that he didn't want back to the grave. After grave robbing wouldn't satisfy his sick craving anymore, he decided to kill 2 women. This is when he started dabbling in taxidermy. His first victim was a woman that owned the Plainsfield hardware store. I can't believe the hardware store is still open. Roberto cut Bethany off. I can't listen to this anymore. What a freak! I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I don't want to hear any more of this guy right now. You and Joshua should really go home. I don't know how long our meeting will go unnoticed, and I don't know if I can protect you guys if anything goes south, Bethany said with sincerity and worry in her voice. We'll only contact you if we really need you for the remainder of the time we're here. I'm sorry I have put you or your job in jeopardy. Thanks for all your help. Roberto ended the call and stared blankly at the wall for several seconds. Joshua, get up. We need to see if this place has a library or some place that would have old newspapers. Roberto made his way to the bathroom and got dressed. When he came back, Joshua was sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. Why are we going to look at newspapers? Joshua said through a yawn. We need to see if we can find information on this Ed Gein guy. Bethany told me some of the crimes he was accused of, and he was one fucked up individual, Roberto replied, as he put his belt through the belt loops on his jeans. After Joshua got dressed, they did a quick search on their phones and found a small local library in Richford. When they arrived at the library, there was one old car in the parking lot. The building was brick and looked ancient. A creeper vine littered the front of the building. Joshua raised a brow at Roberto, and they walked in. The library had a very distinct smell. It smelled like old books. dust with a hint of mold. They walked up to the small desk, and behind it sat a very old, frail woman. She had on small reading glasses. She looked up from her book. "Can I help you, boys?" she asked in a soft tone, barely louder than a whisper. "Yeah, we're looking for—" Joshua started. "Shh!" the librarian replied so loudly that Josh nearly jumped back from the desk. Joshua and Roberto looked around and took note that they were the only people in the library. Joshua put his face closer to the elderly woman and whispered, We wanted to do some research and needed access to old newspapers." The lady stood up slowly and motioned for them to follow her. Joshua and Roberto glanced at each other and followed her to a small back room that contained 4 microfilm machines that were used to review old documents. The lady didn't say another word and shuffled back towards the front desk. Joshua and Roberto sat down and started to go through old papers from around the late 1950s. "I still don't fully understand why we're wasting our time researching the history of this weirdo. We should be trying to figure out what happened to John and Jake, not sitting in an old dusty library." Josh spat hastily. "This is relevant, Josh. Don't you realize that this evil man lived in that old farmhouse? We need to find out everything we can. We might find some sort of clue that might lead us to more information about what really happened to John and Jake," Roberto replied sincerely. After hours of scrolling through countless newspapers, Roberto finally stumbled across a small article about Ed Gein murdering 2 women. "Joshua, I found an article about Mr. Gein. This one must have been written right after or during Ed's conviction," Roberto said as he scanned the article. Joshua walked to the machine Roberto was on and hunched over to look at the article. The article didn't contain any more information than Joshua and Roberto didn't already know. Roberto flipped to the next week's paper and was going to continue going through papers when Josh stopped him. The article was titled, "Gein Brother Found Dead." So, Ed Gein's brother was found dead, but that doesn't say anything more other than the death was sudden and no foul play was suspected. So he just mysteriously died after Ed was convicted, Josh contemplated. "I'll try the obituaries. It might have more information," Roberto said as he started flipping through the other pages, scanning the obituaries for Gein. "You shouldn't be here," her quiet voice croaked. Both Joshua and Roberto's eyes shot to the doorway. The old librarian was standing there, staring at them with cold gray eyes. "You boys need to leave Plainsfield alone and just go home. You don't know what you're getting yourselves into." The elderly lady started to shuffle off. Joshua and Roberto got up. "What do you mean?" Roberto asked in a stern voice. "That house was more than likely the last place your friends were saw alive," the lady said without turning around. "How do you know what we're doing here? And what do you know about what happened to our friends?" Joshua asked as he moved to face the woman. "This is a small town, child. Word travels fast. I can tell out-of-towners when I see them. If I were you, I would leave this town as quickly as I could. And evil lives in Plainsfield." The lady grinned, revealing unpleasant grayish teeth. Joshua and Roberto quickly exited the library. They nearly ran to the car and locked the door when they got in. Roberto pulled out his cell phone and called Bethany. Before Bethany could even say hello, Roberto started frantically speaking. "You're never going to believe what just happened in the library. The old librarian said that we should leave town. She also went on to say that Gein's house was the last place John and Jake were likely seen alive. How does she know that? What's going on at that house?" "We're going to go over to the house and we're going to get answers," Bethany responded with confusion in her voice. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you guys can't contact me anymore. Carl found out I met with you, and it really caused a big fuss. I can't lose my job. You guys cannot go into that house. Everyone avoids that house. I hope you change your mind and just go home and try to make peace with everything that happened. I'll keep you in my prayers. I have to go." A dial tone filled Roberto's ear. She's not going to help us, is she? Joshua asked. Roberto shook his head. It looks like we're really on our own now. We're going to that house now, Roberto said sternly. He put the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, making the tires squeal as they pulled out of the library parking lot. The remainder of the car ride was silent. Roberto and Joshua didn't even look at each other. They just stared blankly out of the windshield. They arrived on the outskirts of Plainfield, and as soon as the house loomed before them, Roberto drove slowly up the thin gravel driveway. Joshua and Roberto both stared at the house and still did not speak a word to one another. Roberto put the car in park and turned off the engine. You ready? Roberto asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Joshua replied as they slowly stepped out of the car. They walked up the few steps that led up to the old, weathered, wraparound porch. Joshua stepped up to the door and wiggled the handle. It's locked, Josh scoffed. You really didn't think it was going to be that easy, did you? Roberto said as he walked to the closed window. He was going to peer into the window but noticed there was paint on the outside. Thick, weathered black paint. There were also nails that were crudely nailed to the windowsill, sealing it shut. Joshua and Roberto made their way around the large house and were met with the same thing at each window: black paint and nails. Well, looks like we're not even going to be able to look at this place, Joshua replied as he stood looking over the house. Let's check out the back of the house. We have to check every possible option, Roberto replied as he headed to the back of the old house. As Joshua and Roberto made their way to the back of the house, they found 2 doors were on the ground. On the side of the house, the doors appeared to be old cellar doors. They were riddled with rust and wore a large chain with an ancient padlock. Roberto pulled the doors, hoping the chain would be so rusted it would just break free. But it didn't. It didn't budge. Shit! What is with this house? Painted windows that are nailed shut and an old cellar with a padlock. It's not like there's anything valuable here, Joshua said, with frustration in his voice. Roberto stared at the cellar door intently. Joshua started to speak, but Roberto raised his hand, shushing him. Listen, Roberto whispered. Rustling and clacking sounds came from the cellar. Both Joshua and Roberto took a step back. Something's in there. We're gonna have to find out what it is, Roberto said, with a tingle of unease in his voice. Bethany said Plainsfield had a hardware store. Let's go into town, get some supplies, break this place open, Joshua suggested nervously as he made his way back to the car. Roberto followed closely behind him. Upon arriving in Plainsfield, it didn't take long to find the only hardware store in the small town. It was one of the few businesses that were in Plainfield. They walked into the store and started to look for the tools they would need to get the cellar door open. So what do you think we're going to need? Crowbars? Bolt cutters? Hammer maybe? Joshua asked as his eyes scanned the wall display. That should be all we need. We'd probably want to grab some work gloves, maybe a rope, flashlight. Extra batteries too, Roberto replied as he picked up a crowbar. It's creepy to think Ed Gein's first victim owned this store, Joshua said, but Roberto cut him off. Let's not talk about Gein in here. It's disrespectful. Roberto spat in a hushed tone. Josh chewed on his bottom lip and nodded. After circling the small store, they made their way to the counter. A tall, burly, bearded man was behind the cash register. He gave them a nod as they laid their tools on the counter. Looks like you boys are trying to get in some trouble tonight, the cashier said as he bellowed out a loud laugh as he smacked the counter. Joshua and Roberto smirked, but didn't respond to the man's joking nature. The bearded man bagged the item, and Joshua and Roberto headed to the car. Let's head back to the motel and go back to the house tomorrow evening. We can wait until it's late so we don't take a chance of anyone seeing us. We don't need any more attention than we've already got, Roberto said. Joshua nodded, and they drove back to the motel.